Well, welcome back, everybody. I think this keynote that we've used this year is so all-encompassing. You can read so much into it, and we can certainly apply it to this session that we're about to have now. Bringing together white magic and education doesn't sound like any easy feat, and it's not. But I think there are ways that we're going to find to reinterpret and describe white magic that might bring the idea down to earth a little bit and relate it to the educational process. But in the book Education in the New Age by Alice Bailey, I'd just like to read you out what it says in the introduction. So the question's put, why is it of value to consider giving time to this education which lies as yet in the future? And we're reminded then that those who read and study the Tibetan's words that as the group thought waves penetrate into the mental atmosphere of humanity, people become impressed, and the inaugurating of the new ways of living and of developing proceeds with increasing facility. So in actual fact, just reading these sort of books is a form of service, and the whole idea of applying our keynote to that, let the forces of creative life circulate on this topic of education and let it be elevated a little bit higher. That's our work in this session, although we won't be going thoroughly into the actual book Education in the New Age. We will be looking at the idea of white magic and education. So I'm delighted to have with me to discuss it two long-standing colleagues and co-workers in the school. We have Anne Woodward over there in the Netherlands, and Chris Noakes, you're down in Totnes, I believe, or somewhere around that part of Devon.
Somewhere around there, yeah.
Somewhere around there. Okay. Well, I thought just to start off with, wanted to point out that to a conventional educator, obviously, the notion of some kind of relationship between magic and education would seem quite strange, preposterous. Standard education develops the powers of analysis, reasoning, and judgment, and the brain really is looked upon as the sole means of apprehending reality and understanding the nature of things. But white magic is a similar process, really. It involves perceiving within with the same intensity as perceiving without. And through the concentration of energy into form, white magic transfers ideas from the inner realms to outer expression. So it is a case of creative concentration. But before we start exploring that, just to start at the beginning, it would probably be quite a good idea just to share with us perhaps what your own experiences were of education. Starting with you, Anne, did you have a good creative education, or was it was the question, what am I doing here, answered? Or did you have doubts about what it was all about? Did you have any existential angst at a young age?
Okay. I've been extremely lucky. I have had an excellent education. I was from the beginning, from 4 years old, in a Montessori school, which maybe we can talk about it later, has different principles and certainly comes closer to white magic involved in education than so-called normal systems. No, I have never had existential angst, as you say it. And the reason for that later, I had no idea at the time, but the reason that I think it was is because knew from the beginning I wanted to be a musician and I wanted to be an artist, and I was really only interested. I learned a lot of other things, and I always liked learning, but they were always means to that goal to become an artist and to express myself in the realm of imagination, basically. Yeah, and for the rest, of course, like we all, I think everybody would ever ask, how was your education? Will answer, well, it very much depended on the teachers. I mean, one teacher will inspire you and give you a sense of self-confidence and hope in life and beauty. And another one will dryly give you some information and you don't even know why you have to learn this information. So I think the personality of the teacher, the soul of the teacher, and how he functions is of utmost importance.
And of
I
course,
also,
you travel the path of the arts, which is lending itself a little more easily towards contact with the soul in that sense in the where the education is at the moment, if you've got the right teacher. And then just for people to know that you've been involved in education for a long time, or you were for a long time in singing and opera, and now it's with adult education as a philosopher.
yes. So I first, or in my career as a singer, I taught at the conservatory and for music, for singers and opera. So I had both individual lessons and I groups sessions with opera singers to make a performance with orchestra and everything. And I do that a little bit still, but not very much anymore, because my second love is philosophy, and I only discovered that like 20 years ago. But now I'm teaching philosophy to adults and groups of people who are particularly interested in a certain subject. And one of the things I've discovered is that art education and philosophy education have very many things in common. They go from there's a view of the world in both cases that you don't see the world as useful or something that you have to make useful to yourself, that you selfishly want to, materialize or but rather as a piece of art. You see the world as a piece of art and everybody in it. And then you start to think, how is that? How is that possible? What am I actually doing here as a human being? Why I am here? What is my society? And all these real good questions. So that's why I'm saying I'm incredibly lucky, because I never had to deal with the feeling that I had to learn a lot of information that I didn't understand why you needed that.
Oh, that's great. Well, Chris, were you a purpose-driven unit of consciousness at kindergarten?
No, I don't know about purpose-driven. I had a very conventional elite education, and as one tends to at a young age, totally took it for granted. It wasn't something I really sort of questioned too much, and I pretty much accepted the premise that the point of using the mind was to sort of order matters to one's sort of convenience or desire on the material plane, which was the sort of, although nobody really put it like that, that was the consensus view, and pretty much continues to be the consensus view as far as I can see. But that was sort of interrupted in my gap year between school and university, when I sort of came upon went to the United States and came upon the sort of the alternative society of the day, and that opened up views of a sort of the wider human person and sort of questions as to what it might require to express that fully. And so by the time I got to university, the notion of sort of stringent academic endeavor wasn't something I valued very much at all.
So I think that for those of us who did sort of like ask that question to ourselves, maybe at the back of our minds at school, of what am I actually doing here? We weren't actually driven by anything in particular. You are then perhaps at the mercy or under the influence of who happens to be the teachers that you resonate with most. And I know that was my own experience. As Anne was saying, it was a particular physics teacher that started to awaken a passion for physics in me, simply not because so much of the topic, but of who he was as a person. And the problem that we seem to be having at the moment is that there's a lot of education now seems to be driving towards this competitive-driven, standardized form of way of developing children that is starting to awaken quite a lot of concern amongst educators. And that's particularly what we wanted to focus on, about how that can be brought back in by bringing in that new spark of creativity. And in one of the school letters that I can't remember if it was February or March, we looked in particular at the PISA testing, the Programme for International Student Assessment, which is part of the Organisation for Economic Cooperation and Development. And this is tremendously influential all around the world now, with league tables that creates all sorts of competition and standardization. And it's a subtle thing, but they actually do, from one point of view, a tremendous job, particularly with children, the impoverished and the poor. But at the same time, there is this standardization of it that educators are awakening to and complaining a lot about. And I think that it'd be interesting to know what your own thoughts are on that situation, just generally speaking. Although you may not be an educator yourself, I know, Chris, that you have a lot of interest in that field, as particularly social science.
Yes, well, I think the education via sort of targets imposed from the government can be way overdone. In fact, I think the prevailing idea amongst most teachers is that it is way overdone and causes a lot of stress without necessarily providing a concomitant depth. That I think an alternative view to education, or to the use of mind, is that we can actually engage with, it enables people to engage with deeper potentials of consciousness. And that should really be the driver that one is aiming at. Not that one doesn't need the skills to sort of apply that on the physical plane, but the skills should certainly follow from the wish to discover what one really is, what sort of relationship really is, and sort of how best that might be expressed.
I think that a lot of the educators who are raising concerns are starting to realise that we've become very much focused and driven by education as pure learning. And if you look in the Standard Dictionary, education is always looked upon as the acquiring of information and skills and learning from that point of view. But there's not perhaps so much time given these days to the teacher themselves in order to use their own techniques and their own sort of resonance to work with children. And that certainly seems to be what you've been doing, Anne, because you've have that more of that opening for you in just purely by what you teach. I mean, music, of course, you're going to be very aware of resonance, and in philosophy too.
Yeah, I must say that there was a time, like maybe 10 years ago, there was all of a sudden this idea here in Holland, and probably also in England, that the art education had to adapt better to society, and that they all of a sudden told us that we should raise people who were competent. And we all said, well, what else have we done in this time then? But it was all of a sudden this general idea that education is about making a useful member of society who functions in society and is successful in the materialistic way in society. Where for me, and certainly now I've thought a lot about it, what children and anybody should learn together with all the information they get is how to be happy, how to know yourself, how to be wise, and how to treat others. And that is now left to sort of coincidences, situations, but it's not. They're not in the curriculum at all. And that is one of the problems, because, that's what it's all about. I can learn to be a fantastic mathematician or whatever. But if I don't know who I am, what my function is in this world, or what even my ideal is, where I want to go, then it's all loose information. Can I give one little image that I really find very inspiring? And that is Pythagoras said, God's creativity, you can imagine like this. God is breathing in chaos, and I would even translate that with information right now, chaotic information. And then he breathes it out as order, as beauty, as mathematics as well. So you need all this information, but that's not the end of it. What this education should really be about, what are you going to do with all this information? And for what purpose?
And the actual word education, or to educate, does mean to lead out, doesn't it? In Yeats's words, it's not about filling a bucket, it's about lighting a fire. Yes. And in the same way, magic actually comes from the Persian word magush, I think, which is Indo-European for to be able to have power. So it's all about having the space to draw out the potential and the magic within. But do you have any particular sort of take on white magic from your experience in the school, or how would you define white magic yourself, or just the magical process?
Well, there are many sides to it. I think for this purpose, for in relation to education, it's maybe good to define magic as the power of creative concentration and creative manifestation. So it's really a power that is inherent in every human being, but that you have to awake. And you can also call that the creative fire. And yeah, the magic, it's not like only a few people have that and everybody else doesn't. We all have it. It has to be awakened. And the magical thing, one of the magical things about it, when you do awaken that, first you need effort and you need concentration and manifestation, but all of a sudden it goes almost by itself. It's like a grace. You sort of enter in the creative process of God himself or herself. And that I find extremely magical. I also want to refer to what Michael said in his talk, that as a teacher, you change into another person. And that's exactly what I have experienced. And I would call that magical. All of a sudden, effortless, you are selfless. You're totally concentrate on the other or on the group. And that is a magical aspect, which is really wonderful.
Beautifully said. Yourself, Chris?
Definitions. Well, I would pretty much entirely agree with Anne's characterization, broad characterization of magic. I think it derives from our engagement with the underlying energy patterns, which sort of ideas which drive phenomenal forms. And from any particular point in evolution, what sort of magic is seeking to do is to bring down those patterns which are imminent, which represent the next stage of synthesis in consciousness and a sort of a fuller manifestation of the potentials of the universe. And creative concentration is what enables us to engage with the underlying patterns and to use imagination and visualization to give form to them.
One of the problems with the testing that goes on worldwide at the moment in these league tables is that the focus is very much on maths, science, and reading. And it's perhaps a reinterpretation of maths and science, and that's particularly needed at this time, because I wonder if those topics create the wonder in us that we have in early childhood, or whether they, I mean, perhaps they should do with all the, or is it more a kind of a weird view that we are given about the universe at the moment? If we look at the opening, the foreword to Education in the New Age by Oliver Reeser, he wrote there that what's really needed at this time is a worldview that makes possible a planetary civilization by incorporating all the different truths about man and the universe that we can extract from regional cultures in their local times and places. There should be an investigation from a very early age of what is man and what kind of physical universe is it that man inhabits. What's his place in the universe? Well, what is our place in the universe? Pretty much nothing by all accounts.
Well, yeah, well, that's how you, then we come on to the subject is of the self, of course. If you see yourself as a little personality with very little influence, which will die within so many years, then you can say, okay, I'm nothing. But when you really begin to understand that you are far more than that, and that you can partake in both all the consciousness of other people and in the consciousness of the whole and consciousness of God, then you are everything. Then all potential is in you. So then you're vitally important.
Mm. And the drive at the moment is also, it seems to be linked with the economy because of organisations such as the OECD, which prepare, in the words of one educator, we're preparing economic beings, and there should be more about citizenship and solidarity, equity, curiosity and engagement, compassion, empathy, all these things that widen the social sphere of awareness. And perhaps the current crisis that we're going through, which perhaps we'll come to in a short while, may help to bring that into focus. But one of the new ways of looking at education that I wanted to touch upon, and there are some now starting to filter in to the educational process, is actually looking at education in terms of the control of desires. And this is most certainly because of the crisis that has been thrust on us because of the environmental crisis and the fact that we can't treat the planet as we do. So there has to be a management of desires. And a few of the leading educators are doing that, are saying that education is really about creating a space between our desires and our inner identity and the management of those, and understanding the world in those terms. And I know that you're quite interested in the difference between active and passive desires or passions. I'd like to say a little bit about that.
Yes. Well, that is one thing we have to understand, that you can't say get rid of your desires, because our essence is desire. And desire, it is where it's directed, which makes it either passive or active or creative or non-creative or destructive. Not mine, but as a human being, my highest desire is to understand, to unify, to love. And that desire can't be strong enough. That is that's our fire. And the other desires, the desires for a whole lot of money, for being safe, all this lots of entertainment, I have come to the conclusion that these desires only exist because we are in pain. They are compensations for our pain. They're not totally essential. It is when I'm in pain and I'm worried, and then I think, oh, I better go to a nice film and do this and do that, or have a nice meal and drink a lot. They're not essential. And if people could realize that, and you can do it with little games, with little in education with children, you can just do a game and show them that what they really want. And then, well, that's what I call passive and active desires. Passive desires or passive passions are the one you have no control over. So all of a sudden you get angry, or you want to eat a pizza, or all these things. They come from all sorts of other sources you're not even aware of. Where your active desires come from your essence. I want to understand. I want to express beauty. I want to love. I want to unify. So That's what I meant.
Well, desire is the energy that enables us to be in the world, to do things, to get things
Exactly.
done. And
Yes.
so there's nothing wrong with desire, but going to the Four Noble Truths of the Buddha, it's desire for for things of the earth that he says is the cause of suffering. And this all leads into the Tibetan's definition of the true goal of education is enlightenment, and true education is a little series of enlightenment. Anything can be enlightenment, any experience, and it leads incrementally at the end of the day to the Buddha's realization. Do you have anything to share on that process, Chris, on the nature of desire?
I think it relates to magic in as much as desire is attraction, and it can be attraction of the seemingly separated self for that which will sort of complete it, or it can be attraction in the sense of group cohesion and magnetic relationship, which is intrinsic to sort of all consciousness. So I think to precipitate sort of impending ideas into the sort of the shared field on the denser planes, the forces, the forms that interpret the ideas and clothe them have to be sufficiently attractive, or they will not be taken up by the collectivity. And so that does raise the question of desire, of what is currently desired and what should be desired. And obviously the two are not by any means usually the same.
There's I'll give you just three interesting definitions of education by leading educators. One is the French educator, politician, philosopher Philippe Mairoux, who defines education as the difficult work to help children to create a space between their desires and themselves. It's about being in the world without putting yourself in the center of the world. And Indian philosopher and teacher Gayatri Spivak says that education is the uncoercive rearrangements of desires. The Tibetan talks about the dynamic expulsive factor of a new affection. And Gert Biester very much talks about teaching, about looking at our desires to see how they relate to the outer world. And in order to do that, you can't be involved in the current speed of life that education has been wrapped up in. It's sort of like part of the worldly process, whereas education should be perhaps like a still water away from the rapid, where a different sense of time and space is experienced to explore these things.
Yes, absolutely. That's very good and very true. That is, and in art you do that. This space of where time is far more flexible, where there's peace, where there's calm, and you can really find your creative source and you can work with it. And it should not only be in art that happens. It should be in all forms of education. And it's so nice. I mean, people will be so happy if they know that and they can tap into that when they've learned to do that. So that's great.
Gert Biester also says that the role of a teacher isn't to provide satisfaction in education to the pupil. If anything, it should be interruptive in the sense that it should be interruptive of the student's identity, to separate him from his desires or her desires, and to focus on them and to see how it relates. Because if you take it to one extreme, then too much desire energy is going to destroy the world and civilization, as we can see now from the way that our economy, the world economy, is going with little concern for the environment and the pollution that we experience. Whereas on the other side of the coin, too little desire leads to you going within a shell and not becoming creative at all. So it's learning to be in that middle space and how to be creatively aware of oneself and to concentrate energy. And concentration, of course, is very much what education is all about. But in meditation, we know that you are actually concentrating something. You are progressively concentrating your own identity onto the physical plane via your soul.
Yeah, yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah, not an easy. Perhaps that wasn't an easy lead to to follow on from. But Chris, do you see any sort of ways forward at the moment yourself in education? And I know I put you a little pointer towards the UNESCO initiative that's going on at the moment, Learning to Become, which itself is a wonderful title, isn't it? I mean, learning to become is into the actual spirit of education. It's a process of unfolding.
Yeah, I mean, it requires investigation into what one might see essential nature as being, and how one can progressively express that more fully, and that is totally what the educational process should be about.
Mm.
But it does also require the means to formulate that along various lines which cohere with the sort of the necessities of our living on the outer planes.
Mm.
So we do need skills. We need conceptual skills. We need sort of denser practical skills, but we also need a sense of why we are doing what we're seeking to do, whether to sort of how that relates to a shared essential nature, and to relationships in consciousness on all the planes.
The whole idea of relationship is something that, well, Anne pointed out to me that one of the leading educating countries in the world has always been Finland. Perhaps it's moving a bit more now towards more to Singapore and Hong Kong, but certainly Finland is always up there. And I was very surprised to see that they're actually at is it the age of 15 or 16? They're actually abandoning all subjects in school.
Yeah, all fixed subjects. Yeah, that's an amazing. That's a very good and very practical, understandable idea. So instead of the subject economics, let's say, it would be an educational phenomena. So what you experience all the time. So what do I experience? I go to the market and I buy some stuff and I need money, and there are some people from all over the world selling things there. So the class, a group of people with the teacher, go to the market and actually talk there. What do we see here? What's going on? And learning economics that way. Another way would be mathematics and logic, two subjects that are not very popular with most people, and yet we need them badly. But if you connect them to reality, to what people experience every day, we all know now that logic and mathematics are at the basis of all what we are doing now, internet connections and computer systems and in artificial intelligence. And then they would be interested again. So, and then it depends in what society you live and what you want, of course, but it's really looking at education from a practical point of view, and practical I also mean the development of your soul and of your ideals, and not as abstract projects which everybody has to learn the same. No, that has to be applied. And I think that's what I understood from it. I just read it also, this new movement in Finland, but I think that's what they are trying to do.
The Finnish approach to education has always been group centered as well, and they say that that's why they've often been at the top of the PISA testing. It's not because of any individual skill in math, science, and reading, and that so much because that they create a space for group exploration of topics, and they've always connected them with practical things and subjects where it brings people together to discuss problems and look for solutions. And that way it brings everybody. There are no winners and losers, no brightest and least bright. It's a group endeavor whereby the learning experience is for the group as a whole, and those who are perhaps a little bit brighter in sub-subjects can bring in the others, and they're learning to be teachers and to be educated themselves at the same time. So it seems, that they are certainly still leading the way, and to take on an experiment like this is really rather wonderful.
Yes, yeah, that's really. I just wanted to come back to what you said before, the the question of world pollution and how we deal with the environment and how can we respond to that in education. I think that could also be a practical course that you ask yourself with the group, why do we actually misuse the world? Why do we misuse nature? Why is that so gone out of hand? And then it makes nobody happy. It will destroy us all. And why on earth are we doing that? And then you might refer back, I think I said in the beginning, that there are two ways of looking at the world. You can look at the world either more ways, infinite amount of ways, but two ways I want to focus on. And the one is, which is destructive. Hello, here am I, here is the outside world, here are all the other people. How can I use them to my benefit? And that causes all the misery in society and in your own life, where you see it as a creation of beauty and creation of something you can learn from and should fit into, then it's totally different. Then you feel the unity with all things.
I mean, creativity is so important because it's an expansive process. If you don't have creativity in something that you're doing, and it's a one-way process in education, the assimilation of knowledge, then you're not expanding. But when you're creating and engaging, it brings a greater sense of identity and of who you are. And by nature, that creativity takes the center of identity off yourself and into what's being created and the purpose of that creation.
Yes.
Yes.
It's an expansion of identity, and that is very, very important.
I mean, that's exactly what the Arcane School is all about. And put a little plug in for that, but maybe your experience, Chris, in the Arcane School, that ultimately the esotericist is self-taught. So it's not a learning process that the school actually applies to a student. It's more of an opening up and an embracing of the student for them to explore within certain parameters their own creativity.
Yeah, the school certainly has to indicate a potential way to to present some hypotheses, to some ideas about what may be possible, what essential nature may connote, and certain structured techniques for investigating that. But the actual work of doing the investigating and penetrating into different levels of consciousness is totally up to the student, and that could not be any other way. You have to learn from your own very repeated mistakes.
Mm. So it's often when we're in periods of crisis that leaps forward are taken traditionally in civilization. So drawing on this crisis we're experiencing at the moment, it coincides with the big UNESCO initiative. It's a 3-year initiative, Futures of Education, and it's titled, as I mentioned earlier, Learning to Become. And I just want to read you out a little bit about this. It says, with accelerated climate change, the fragility of our planet is becoming more apparent. Persistent inequalities, social fragmentation, political extremism are bringing many societies to a point of crisis. Artificial intelligence, biotechnology, all these crises, let alone COVID, have serious ethical and governance concerns, but they also have promises as well. And it's just a question of how we turn it into human flourishing. And their vision is that knowledge and learning are humanity's greatest resources for responding to these challenges and inventing alternatives, and taking the view that education transforms the world. What's interesting about it is that it's a 3-year initiative, and they've split it into 3 years, and very much like we work in cycles of 3, where there's a year of crisis, and then there's a year of tension, and then there's a year of outreach. Theirs is a year first of visioning, followed by a year of synthesis and feedback, and then followed by a year of debate and outreach. So that's a very esoteric process in itself. And the whole process is really very inspiring, and I think it touches upon the actual idea of white magic, and in fact the building of the Antakarana, because one of the definitions the Tibetan gives of the early stages of building the Antakarana, the bridge between the lower and higher mind, is the science of social evolution. But one commentator in the UNESCO group said that at the moment what we need is a metamorphosis of the school, and education must produce something common in a public space. Schools must experiment with new ways of organising space and time, and the curriculum must be centred on planetary consciousness and social evolution. I mean, what wonderful statements those are.
Yeah. Well, that's what we all talked about right now. It comes all back in this formulation. They also have a website where everybody can contribute, I've seen, which is also a very beautiful idea. If anybody has an idea and wants to add to the development of new ideas, then they can. So maybe it's nice to put that up at some point. I don't know.
Yes.
We need everybody. It's not a matter of a few well-learned people who are going to do that. We, as humanity, we have to do it all together in this case.
It's certainly a case that, sorry, Chris, were you going to?
Well, yes, I'm going to say that, yeah, I mean, education is certainly sort of, it doesn't stand as an area by itself. It's part of sort of social relationship, the sort of the process of developing social relationship, and it's very much developed in a political context. And I think in order to be able to develop a new approach to education that will actually sort of work in society, we also have to address various issues, say in political economy. The fact of the sort of the view, say, of people acting in economic self-interest, homo economicus, and sort of economic patterns which correlate with that are probably at the root of the sort of the increasing busyness and sort of frantic rushing around, trying to work off accumulated debt, as the monetary system is based on creation of debt, that have developed over the last sort of several hundred years, sort of worldwide. And if we don't address economic and political issues, I think it will be difficult stably to change the educational system as well.
Yes, I totally agree with that, because that is, without doing something about inequality in general, we can never have a sound educational systems, because the people who feel they don't have the same chances will always get angry and say, oh, it's all very nice for these people, but I better use the world for my own benefit, but nobody cares about me. And so it's totally linked with all political and social things. So we have a long job to do, because before we have sorted out what possession actually means and how it should be divided in the world, we will always have these problems.
And if we look at the way world economics works, that sort of led us to one of the crises of, many of the crises that are all coming together at the moment. There's the coronavirus, which is isolating us all from one another, and yet helping us to re-engage in many instances in a different way, and to realize how valuable social and emotional contact is with one another. Certainly the people on the children who have been cooperating with UNESCO initiative have been talking very much about how they're starting to appreciate much more how much the human contact is so necessary to education, that social interaction and working together as one. But also economically, the fact that the environmental problem now, which the children are very much aware to, and leading the way about, which is marvelous, has come to this point because economics, really world economics, can't expand anymore. It started off occupying space, where trade was built on the conquering of new lands and forging trade, and then when all that was used up and the world was thoroughly conquered, then it moved to time, when we started having stocks and shares, and when it became a matter then of who could buy and shares and stocks at the right time and sell them just before their competitor at the right time that would make money. But the speed of computers and that has sort of brought that to an end now. So now we seem to be focusing on the fact of creating the desire for new things. And Gert Biester gives that interesting idea of that we're living in the shopping era. And the skill that companies like Apple have is not in selling you the desire for one of their products, like a phone. It's the ability to sell you the desire for a new phone, for the next better thing. Because that's the only way that economics has to go now, because we all want our desire natures, particularly in the developed worlds, are being fed so much that with commercial targeting and that, whatever we've got just isn't enough. And maybe we're at that stage now when we're seeing the suffering of the rest of the world, the have-nots and that, where we're starting to break through and realize that we don't need all this material stuff.
No, it's learning that these desires are not essential, like I said before. And a lot of people know that, and that is one of the blessings in disguise of the COVID. A lot of people, all of them, at least a lot of people I know, say, oh, actually, I like this life. Not too much entertainment, not too much obligations. I have to go out and have dinner with so and so. But actually, a simple life is so nice. You can be perfectly happy with a simple life and a few possessions. And some people, no, it's true. And some people beginning to experience it, not only have it as a theory, but they experience. So my hope is, I think Chris said that at the beginning of the conference, the new normal will be that people realize that they essentially don't desire all these things. They essentially desire love, unity, beauty. That's what I hope.
Well, it was coming towards the end of our session. That went rather quickly. But are there a few questions, Dominic? Do people have anyone have their hand up? If you'd like to contribute, please raise your hand.
There's a couple of hands up, but I'd just like to read out one comment from the chat from Verena Davis, which was the various differences in the personality vehicles makes it difficult to fit in with the one-size-fits-all educational approach in the mainstream. And following on from that thought, it just occurred to me, could one argue that the sign of the spiritual maturity of a nation could be how variable or diverse is their educational provision? So ponder that while I look for hands.
Any comments?
Well, it's true that one size doesn't fit all. That's obvious, and that is we haven't talked about that, but that is what the Montessori school has recognized so beautifully, and also the Steiner schools, which I know a lot of people working there. The only problem with those two schools, they have, every individual has almost a different curriculum because they have different needs. Well, not problem, but we need a new system because they're basically aiming for the development of the individual and not on the development of a group consciousness. And I think that's what now needed.
Do you think more of a re-energizing of culture in the sense that popular culture, in one sense, has brought the youth together. But at the same time, do we need to celebrate more of the cultures of various parts of the world and different races, different ethnic groups, and let those shine out more? Because this homogenous sort of, it's like everything else. Culture is becoming standardized a little bit, a bit homogenized.
There's a hand up from Rosemary Steele.
Hi. Yep. I hope you can hear me. I like the comment you read out, Dominic. It's what I'm interested in. Education should be facilitating the person to have choice in life because they can see their potential. And currently in educational training to be a teacher, you're taught all the ways people learn, but when you get to the school, you're obliged to teach in one way, thus losing 60% of the children. So they grow up to think, oh, I'm no good, I can't pass an exam, or etc. And another friend of mine, a teacher, the other day said 2 of the students from the tech who couldn't afford to go to university and had done a practical course, had the papers from university, flew through them, and could have got a degree with the greatest of ease, whereas the ones who've taken the paperwork course have no practical experience of application. So we're missing out on the potential of so many people because we are categorizing and choosing to say, you're a success or you're not, you're academic or you're not. What does it matter? You're a person and you have potential, and realizing that potential is surely what education should be about. I'm sorry, I finished.
Needed space and to reflect on that.
Well, I totally agree, of course. But then, as I said, Montessori and Steiner do that more. So they don't say you are the best and you are the least. They don't do that. They don't tell people, little kids, you don't sing because you're singing out of tune, so you can't, you can't be with the group. And of course, that is totally true. We have to, on the one hand, individualize education, and on the other hand, as I said, we have to now find a way to build group consciousness in practice. And how do you do that? That is in itself, it could be a subject for a whole day. How are we going to do that? Talking to the kids now in different wordings maybe, but how do we build something so we are all aware of each other? And how do we realize that together we can do far more than everybody apart? And that sort of thing. That yeah, there's a lot. But I also have hope that a lot of teachers already are trying to do this. It's indeed, and that's why I said 10 years ago there was all of a sudden a ridiculous standardization. I don't know how it is now actually, because I'm not involved in an institution in any way. But all of a sudden everybody had to go for competence. Yeah. But I think they have come back from it. It doesn't work. It doesn't work in art, and I don't think it works in any other subject. So I think, yeah.
Any more hands raised, Dominic?
Yes, Susan Schilfarth.
Yeah, Suzanne Schilfarth.
Sorry.
Anne just spoke about the standardization about 10 years ago that you went through and the UK went through, well, the United States went through as well. Do you think that there was some planetary, astrological energy that caused this viewpoint to grow to some sort of crystallization so that we could deal with it from an esoteric group viewpoint?
Are you asking me?
I'm asking all 3 of you.
Oh.
Yes, but yes.
Well, I can. I don't know about that. Let's put it that way. I've never even thought about that. You could well be right, but what I do know is that it had a financial background, because they just wanted to see if they could do with less schools and with bigger groups. So the more you standardize things, the cheaper it is in a way. And I think that was behind it all. But yeah, I'll think one day about what you asked, but I don't have an answer.
Well, we are coming towards, well, we are past our time as usual. You know, I only went 50 minutes over our time yesterday, but I'm getting a bit of a look now. So I'm going to, if you've got any concluding remarks or anything you'd like to say, or do you think that's, we've reached a natural end there?
Well, you just reached the flexibility of time era.
New sense of time is what we need.
Yeah.
Chris?
Yeah, I think we've probably reached a reasonable concluding point for this afternoon.
Well, thank you both for your participation. I think that was a very interesting session. You know, we came into it to let it be free flowing and see where it took us. And I feel that, you know, is an act of creative concentration in itself. And I hope that people who participated, attendees, felt that too. I'll just leave you with another thought from one of the participants from UNESCO in this Learning to Become initiative, an educator who said that it's in times of global crisis when destruction is possible, and when we're facing that, and obviously the Hiroshima was one point, and the Cuban Missile Crisis was another. But it's at those times when destruction faces us, when the idea of humanity becomes real. And it's like that the idea shines out with much greater luminosity to contrast in that darkness. And I think that there's a general sense that that's what's happening at the moment. There's a sense of there's a great creative opportunity at this time, and a feeling of connectivity, and the hope that this time we're going to all do something about it. So thank you very much, Chris and Anne, for your participation.